Desperation and Faith. In Mark's gospel today, he gives us two stories of desperation and faith. We've all been there. Jesus has just returned to his homeland after being in the Gentile area, and that crossing the sea in the storm he quelled last week and put away the fear of his disciples. He arrives in the Jewish section, and he's met by a crowd. And from that crowd, Jairus, a synagogue leader, comes forward to him. Now, Jairus' position, we could compare it to being that of like our mass coordinators, who be sure all the details of liturgy are in place and everything is done correctly. That was kind of Jairus' role as a synagogue leader. And so he comes before Jesus and falls at his feet, desperately pleading for Jesus to come and heal his daughter, who is critically ill. On the way, Jesus says nothing to Jairus. He just starts to proceed to his house, followed by a crowd, when Mark interrupts that story with another story about an anonymous seeker, sufferer. A woman who has suffered from a hemorrhage for 12 years and who has spent all her savings and going to quack doctors trying to find a cure. She is desperate. She has no money left. There is nothing more she can do, except she's heard about this person, Jesus. And she thinks to herself, if I just could touch his clothes, maybe I would be healed. Now, imagine this scene. This huge crowd following Jesus. And this woman trying to weave her way up to Jesus, at least to get behind him. Because of her infirmity, she is considered ritually unclean, impure. And anyone she would touch would be unclean and impure. And so she has to wend her way through the crowd, trying to touch no one so that she can get to Jesus. She gets there and touches his cloak, and immediately, we're told, her flow of blood dried up, and she was healed. And Jesus, likewise, felt power go out from him. So he turns and says, "Who touched me?" His disciples think he's crazy. They say, "You see this crowd and you ask, 'Who touched you?'" But he was insistent on calling out the person who touched him. Why? Not because he wanted to chastise her, not because he wanted to embarrass her, but because he wanted to applaud her faith. And not only that, Jesus didn't want to be known as a lucky charm, per se, that if I can just touch him, everything will be okay. Instead, he wanted relationship with the woman. He wanted to see her eye to eye, as he does with all of us. Wants relationship. It was only then, when he saw her eye to eye and said to her, "Woman, your faith has saved you." So now the procession carries on back to Jairus' home. And before arriving, they are met by mourners who say, "Don't bother the teacher anymore, your daughter died." This time he speaks to Jairus and says, "Do not be afraid, just have faith." He proceeds to Jairus' house and puts everyone out and is ridiculed when he says to the crowd of professional mourners that see death as the ultimate end to a human's existence. He says to them, "She is asleep, not dead," and takes her by the hand and raises her, heals her, and tells her parents, "Get her something to eat." We should look at the details of these stories because they say something to us in our own faith journey. Jairus, this synagogue official, could have come up to Jesus and said, "You know, I have this position in the synagogue. I kind of deserve this favor from you." But no, Jairus, in his desperation, became a beggar at the feet of Jesus. His whole demeanor puts his complete trust in this desperate situation before Jesus. How do we approach Jesus in our times of desperation? Do we say, "Jesus, I've done all the right things. I've said all the right prayers. I've said all the right novenas. I've done all the things that I'm supposed to do. Therefore, you should do this for me." Rather than coming before Jesus in our desperation and be like a beggar. The stories also point to Jesus as one who is profoundly caring about those who suffer. This poor father who is desperately pleading for the healing of his 12-year-old daughter reminds me of any of you parents who have had to undergo the serious illness of one of your children, who would do anything, even trade places with that child, to take away their suffering. Jesus profoundly cares about your sufferings and your desperations. He tells the woman, "Your faith has saved you." He calls us into a deep relationship of faith, but that's only possible when we have that relationship with Jesus. There's another detail of this story that maybe you have missed. The girl was 12 years old. The woman suffered 12 years. In the scriptures, 12 is a sign of wholeness, of completion. And so Jesus takes a completely desperate situation and makes it whole. He does that in our lives. He does that in our lives because we as a Christian people, as followers of Jesus, know that even in our desperate situations, that God has the power over death. We are nourished each week at this table to strengthen that faith that Christians are not professional mourners. When faced with loss and desperations, we know that even if our prayer for healing is not answered in the way we would like, that death is not the end. Our first reading said, God did not design death. He did not create death. And so it is our faith that we strengthen each week to believe that death is not the end. Nor does it destroy the bonds that we forge in life. And so these stories that Mark gives us today speak to us in our times of desperation and speak to us about our faith. Let us take those words of Jesus to Jairus to heart. Those words that he said, "Do not be afraid, just have faith."